Welcome back, film fans. This video will be addressing two things, which is the results of the recent poll that I did, where I asked you guys on my community post that I made to essentially pick what was in your view the best Bruce Lee film that was made. And then off the back of that, as a result of that, and also in regards to my Enter the Dragon review that I did a year ago now, when I reviewed all the films of Bruce Lee, courtesy of the Arrow box set that came out last year. And as a result of the kind of a bit of the backlash and the flack, and also the criticism that I got in regards to some of the views that I expressed in the video, or a lot of the views that I expressed in that video on Enter the Dragon, I thought I'd address some and most of those criticisms. So first off, let's get into the results of the poll, which is that, actually before we do that, by the way, if you like what I'm doing, and of course if you like what I talk about in this video and what I've spoken about, like I say, in previous videos, please do like and comment and subscribe if you can, because it really helps out myself and the channel going forward, because it will hopefully enable me to make a lot more content in the future, a lot more videos for you guys. So got loads of ideas, it's just about finding the time to get them out to you guys. So yeah, so the results of the poll were kind of predictable in the sense that, so going in, I would have said that Game of Death would have ranked last and Enter the Dragon would have ranked first. And then the other films kind of ranked them in between, essentially between two and four. And that's exactly what we got, okay? So over 100 of you voted, which is way more than I actually thought would vote on the poll. So thank you for those that did vote. And yeah, as predicted, Game of Death came in last, receiving 9% of the votes. The Big Boss came in fourth, which received, I think, roughly 12% of the votes. I'm checking the percentages here, by the way. That's why I'm looking off screen, in case you're wondering. Where the Dragon came in third, with 18% of the vote, which would have been my pick for the best Bruce Lee film, as you know, if you're well aware, if you've seen my videos. Fist of Fury came second with 19%, and then Enter the Dragon was a clear winner at the top with 42% of the vote share. I'm not going to say my poll is like indicative of like what everyone thinks about Bruce Lee at large, but I would say if this poll was like, this is like a microcosm, if you scale this up, I do think that Enter the Dragon would have over 50% of the vote if you like asked all film fans or Bruce Lee fans. I think Enter the Dragon would receive over 50% of the vote. Game of Death would still be the least popular, and then like I say, the other three would be somewhere in the middle. That's how I believe a kind of a wide, far-reaching vote would go. Part of that is because Enter the Dragon is the most widely known, most widely seen, and most iconic of Bruce Lee's films. So that always plays a factor, because I think you get some people that vote in polls like this. I'm not saying those of you that voted on mine, but a lot of people on a far-reaching poll, they would, if they just love the film Enter the Dragon, they'd vote for it regardless, even if they hadn't seen the other films. I think that happens sometimes, whereas I think really you should only vote in a poll if you're selecting films, if you've seen all of those eligible films. But yeah, those are the results. And off the back of that, I actually want to discuss Enter the Dragon explicitly with you guys, because of course, like I say, I reviewed the film last year, got quite a lot of flack. I'll put the link for the in the description for the original review if you do want to watch it, but it is in my Bruce Lee playlist where I review all the films, as well as my ranking video, and I'll put this in the playlist as well for future reference and purposes, in case you did want to, for whatever reason, binge watch or reference any of my videos. But yeah, I received, like I say, a lot of criticism for my view on Enter the Dragon. So I want to preface this before I kind of go in on Enter the Dragon again a bit, on a bit of context, because I think some people were kind of, I think maybe they watched that video in isolation on Enter the Dragon and judged where I was coming from in terms of my takes, like completely wrong, or they were dismissing where I was coming from. Remember, this was in the context of me doing a Bruce Lee retrospective. So this is in the context of me being a Bruce Lee fan and a fan of his films. All of his films to some degree. I mean, Game of Death is the one I have like the biggest reservations with, and I will say that in many regards I actively dislike that film. But Enter the Dragon on the whole, I do, believe it or not, I do actually like, and is a film that, it was the first Bruce Lee film I ever saw. It was the first martial arts film I ever saw. To a lot of people, it's a gateway martial arts film. Yeah, it's the gateway film to discovering Bruce Lee, his cinema, and other martial arts figures of the like, such as that's Jackie Chan, Jet Li, whoever it might be. Donnie Yen, I suppose, being a more kind of prominent modern example. But so like I said, it's the first film of his that I ever saw. And it made a huge impression on me, and as a result I saw the rest of his other films, and it was being shown as the part of a Channel 4 martial arts season back in the day. It wasn't a Bruce Lee season, I don't think, it was a martial arts season, because I think they were also screening Jackie Chan movies like Police Story and stuff. But so that's how I saw that film originally, back in the 90s. So I've lived with this film a long time. It's not like I've just seen this film and I'm complaining about it. I know this film very well. And I've seen it a lot of times. I've seen all of Bruce Lee's movies a lot of times. I'm a huge fan of Bruce Lee, so I come from it from that angle, from that perspective. It's not me trying to be having a bad faith debate or being disingenuous. In fact, the one thing I hope I can say about this channel is that it's actually run by integrity. Like, all my opinions are genuine and my own, and I try and couch them as much as possible in kind of rationale and reason and explanation, which is maybe probably what some of you took issue with, ironically, is that I probably went into too much detail about my gripes with Enter the Dragon, so it sounded like I was like being petty or quibbling, but I like to think they're all major issues that I see in the film. But again, to give you a bit more background on my history with Enter the Dragon is, so I studied film at uni, and Enter the Dragon was one of the films that we studied for World Cinema, incidentally, when we were studying transnational cinema. Enter the Dragon was the film that we were looking at that particular week. And I remember being like, they asked how many people had seen this film, and you know, to put your hands up, and I was one of them, but the number was surprisingly low, the amount of students that had seen this film, and I was shocked. But I was also like weirdly quite proud, because I was thinking, well, they probably haven't seen any other Bruce Lee film, and so I kind of felt kind of excited for them and proud of like, oh, I can't wait to see these guys' reactions. They're going to see their first Bruce Lee film. And so that kind of gives you a bit of perspective of like how much I do actually still have quite a lot of love and fondness for Enter the Dragon, despite my issues. And again, more context here. So because I was looking at the Bruce Lee films as a whole, I was analysing for me my perceived flaws with Enter the Dragon in relation to the rest of Bruce Lee's films. So where I think it falters in relation to, say, the strengths of Fist of Fury or Way of the Dragon. So with that being said, I want to kind of, what I've done is, I think a lot of the criticisms in the comments, I kind of roughly grouped into kinds of critiques of my video. So I've kind of grouped them roughly on that basis. I just want to go through kind of like 4 or 5 strains of criticism and try and respond to them best I can. I'll kind of get rid of the ones that I find the most egregious first, actually, which is that some people were commenting on the fact my age was almost as if I was too young, which is why I don't have a kind of fondness and appreciation for this film. Like there was 1 or 2 comments saying, see what I think 40 years from now. And, you know, I'm a kind of young whippersnapper. Like, of course, I'm not going to understand or have kind of significant context with the film. I take issue with this kind of criticism generally, not just when it's aimed at me, but generally for 2 major reasons. I mean, one is, you don't know you're assuming my history with the film, which is that I've lived with this film for over probably about 25 years now, roughly. How long is it before I can have like a take that's allowed with this film, that's acceptable? Do I have to have been alive in 1973? Because the thing is here is, my response to this is, for example, why study history? If you weren't alive when it happened, well, you can't have a valid opinion on it then, because you weren't alive when it happened, you weren't there. Whereas I find actually, ironically, a lot of people's takes on things are kind of skewered precisely because they were in the moment. It's hard to have that kind of that distanced, you know, looking in from the outside perspective, and have, you know, I think you can actually sometimes get more nuanced takes as a result of that. But yeah, a lot of people were kind of saying because of my age I can't appreciate this film, but like I said, just giving the context of my history with Bruce Lee, I don't think that's a valid take or opinion at all, or a rebuttal to what I'm saying. feeding into that, I think a lot of people were kind of saying that I wasn't giving it the historical context, the proper historical context. People were saying, you know, oh, you know, it was a film that was made 50 years ago. Give it a break. It's a product of its time, which, okay, that makes sense if all of Bruce Lee's films, which by the way, most of them were made a couple of years before Enter the Dragon, 71, 72, commit the same flaws and pitfalls, which they don't, which is precisely my point. You can say, oh, you know, stop going on about the maybe the problematic racial elements of the film, or elements of kind of Orientalism in the film, which we'll get to its racial politics in a little bit. But oh, you know, if it's a product of its time, forget about it. Which is, to me, that's a problematic take, because to say that no films were kind of progressive on those terms 50 years ago is not true. Some were. So if some were, that means this was also capable of not committing those pitfalls that I spoke about. So why doesn't it? Which is exactly why I talk about them. So it's actually precisely because I am studying it from its historical context and saying, well, why did it do this? So why did it not have the confidence, namely Warner Brothers, have the confidence that Bruce Lee is a lead? Why did it saddle him with two co-stars, namely a white co-star and a black co-star? We all know why. Is to kind of basically cover all the markets so it can kind of essentially make as much profit as possible, because it's capitalizing upon what it wanted to do, which was essentially create a riff off the James Bond franchise. It will kind of make its own Americanized James Bond adventure, capitalize on the success of Bruce Lee, and also capitalize on the success of the blaxploitation movement at the time, which is why you had Jim Kelly as the star. This is why, for example, you have Bruce Lee, who's a kind of aromantic, asexual protagonist. Roper is the one that is the kind of the romantically committed, monogamous, committed one who actually has a romantic interest, and then Jim Kelly's character is the problematic black buck stereotype who, when picking the women, picks loads of them and sleeps with them all, is saddled with all the comic one-liners, and is dismissed first in the film, dispatched at first. Well, he's the only character of the three dispatched in the film about halfway through. These are symptomatic of problematic areas of how it's kind of codifying and treating race, essentially. Roper is the suave, like I say, monogamously committed, sexualized, but suave, has some one-liners, sophisticated character. Bruce Lee has a kind of, you know, is the, like I said, the aromantic character. Now, someone did say in the comments that, oh, it's because he's, you know, a Shaolin monk, essentially. That's why has no sexual interest in Mei Ling's character in the film. I just find that rather convenient. It's interesting as well that he happens to be a Shaolin monk, which feeds into another criticism that I was talking about with Enter the Dragon, which is that it has pitfalls of what's called Orientalism. Now, Orientalism is the idea that the East is a kind of invention of the West. So it's about our stereotypical perceptions of the East. Namely, it's a place of kind of, you know, foreignness and mysticism and exoticism. Can't quite understand it, but we like it for those things as well. So it has like problematic connotations. This is a kind of theory that was developed by Edward Said. So if you want to read more about Orientalism, read Edward Said's work. But essentially, the notion that Bruce Lee plays an everyman in every one of his previous films, but in this one he happens to be a Shaolin monk, because what else is he going to be if he's Asian, right? It's almost like that kind of problematic idea. Someone did say about, in credit to Williams's character, that it shows, for example, how the reason why he enters this martial arts tournament is because he's fleeing essentially racial oppression in America, the result of the racist pigs, the cops that kind of accost him, and then he beats them up, and that's kind of like a heroic moment for his character. Completely agree. It is essentially borrowing elements of kind of blaxploitation. That is a moment that audiences of all kinds would have cheered. Okay, if they felt oppressed in any way, they would get behind that and cheer that. I'm just saying, combined with the other elements, and blaxploitation, by the way, isn't entirely unproblematic. It has its own problematic elements anyway. I mean, anyone that knows about blaxploitation cinema knows this, or has read upon it at all, knows that it isn't kind of entirely progressive. And it wasn't even seen so at the time as well. So that's not me being... So basically all of these things, I think people are saying, when I look at it through they're saying I'm looking at it through a modern lens, which is basically you're accusing me of presentism, which is basically where we use modern day more progressive values to judge something in the past and apply those values to the past, which I don't think is the case. I think these were problems with the film back then. Okay, that's what I'm stating. I'm stating that Enter the Dragon for me is not as a successful Bruce Lee or martial arts film compared to, say, Way of the Dragon or even Fist of Fury, precisely because the creative control that Bruce Lee had, more so in Way of the Dragon than Fist of Fury, meant that he was able to express and espouse his philosophy of martial arts in terms of Jeet Kune Do and storytelling through the fighting scenes in conflict. He had more creative control of those things than he did than in Enter the Dragon, pardon me. Because in Enter the Dragon, not only is it the way that they're shot, I don't think is that great, in the sense that it's choppily edited, close-ups, it doesn't capture all the action, some of it's quite confusing, and the use of non-professional martial artists. So, for example, Shere Khan, who plays Han, I think it is, that end fight sequence suffers precisely because he's not a professional martial artist, and so frequently you can see the kind of stunt doubles and so on and so forth, and it's not as great as a fight sequence as it should or could have been given the production values and the budget for Enter the Dragon in comparison to the Golden Harvest films. But I'm just saying it's a compromised production as the result of these confluence of factors of some of Golden Harvest influence, a lot of Warner Brothers, Bruce Lee, saddled with 2 co-stars. There's a lot going on in the film. The attempt to make a kind of an Americanized James Bond film. You got Han, who's the disfigured, with a hand, the disfigured super villain that has his own lair on an island, and Bruce Lee's the kind of secret agent that's sent there to kind of append this. He discovers the drug operation underneath, and he has a whole host of henchmen and villains. It's very James Bond-esque, right? Just with these kind of like Orientalist martial arts trappings. Incidentally, it's interesting to note that Man with the Golden Gun, the next Bond film that followed, in the wake of the success of Enter the Dragon, was influenced by that and had some martial arts sequences in there. So that's quite interesting to note, the circular cultural feedback loop that happens there. So I think some people, like I say, were accusing me of over-analysis, as if to say, like, Bruce Lee, they're annoyed at how I've analysed Bruce Lee. So they clearly, a lot of us here revere Bruce Lee, but we're saying he's not worthy, his films are not worthy to be analysed deeply. And so maybe that leads to an overarching problem in terms of how we see movies differently sometimes. So I see movies that can be entertaining on their own terms, but nonetheless be very problematic for the reasons that I can lay out, A, B, and C, or whatever the film might be and whatever the problems I have with it. That doesn't mean that I don't necessarily stop enjoying the film. It could be a guilty pleasure, for example, or it could be that I enjoy it despite certain misgivings and issues that I have with it. The reason why, like I say, I pointed them out is because I was trying to make a case for why I think Way of the Dragon, for example, is a superior martial arts and Bruce Lee film, particularly in the canon of Bruce Lee, in comparison to Enter the Dragon. Some people said that they prefer the theatrical cut to the director's cut, which is fine. The reason why I said I prefer the director's cut is because with the discussion with the monks at the beginning, is because yes, it might be kind of narratively clunky, but at least it's expressing what Lee intended with a more kind of philosophical exposition in regards to... You can tell that Lee would have wanted that scene kept in there if I think he had full creative control. Yeah, incidentally, it's one of the first scenes to be dropped, but then restored for the director's cut. But also the final fight scene with Han makes more sense as a consequence. Because the line that the monk says to him about... the enemy has, only images behind which he hides his true motives. Break the image and you'll break the enemy, essentially. That line makes sense, and you hear it in voiceover, and that's why he breaks the glass. So it provides psychological motivation and the impetus for Lee's character to break the glass in the Hall of Mirrors scene at the end when he's fighting Han. Otherwise, it just kind of randomly occurs and makes very little sense in the theatrical cut. Someone made a very good point about the how it is progressive in the sense of the British cop the British backup arriving in the end is kind of reminiscent of Keystone Cops, the kind of bumbling Keystone Cops where they're too late to the party, everything's already happened, Which is a kind of like, yeah, it's a kind of subtle critique, you could argue, of kind of like British imperialist influences. Remember, Hong Kong at the time was still under British colonial rule up until 1997. However, I would argue that maybe that's just more of a kind of like American perspective of British, of trying to show up Britishness and make us, yeah, kind of the negative stereotypes of the British. For example, the one British character in the film, you know, he's seen in bed, very posh accent, he's brought tea. It's all very stereotypical of, so maybe it's more of like a kind of like an American anti-British sentiment than it is a kind of anti-imperialist one. But again, that's, I suppose that's maybe a bit open-ended. I think those are a lot of the objections that people had. Essentially, that I was kind of maybe taking the film too seriously. It's just a movie, that kind of, which I never liked that criticism, because it's just a movie until it isn't for you, because there are some movies that you'll take more seriously than others. Okay, it's the same, actually. It's the same kind of alibi that Tarantino will use whenever he's taken to task on his films. Films that, you know, most important, precious thing in the world to him, until it's only just a movie when someone's taken to task on something he doesn't like. But yeah, so like I say, I was criticised for over-analysis, or like I say, presentism. So not looking at things in their historical context, which is actually what I was trying to do, like I say. And yes, like I say, some people kind of knock the director's cut, and a lot of people, I think, were quick to reinforce this idea of, you know, this is an iconic martial arts film. You know, Lee wouldn't be revered in the same sense as he was today. I think that's true, certainly, if it wasn't for Enter the Dragon. Certainly in the West. I think in the East, Enter the Dragon didn't do as well financially, probably because of feeding into the issues of what I'm saying, of he was probably far less relatable to Asian audiences and more of a kind of Western perceived stereotype of what we think Asian people are like. Or I think this feeds into, actually, you know, you get a lot of casualized, dare I say it, kind of racism towards Bruce Lee today, when people kind of make the Bruce Lee noises. That's like a stereotype of Asian people. And I think that's almost a consequence of like Bruce Lee being associated with the kind of exoticism and strangeness, that he's different, which he was different, of course, but in a kind of extraordinary sense, in a physical sense. But I think people feed into kind of that being a kind of Asian stereotype, which is very, very harmful, of course. But I think Enter the Dragon being the only Western film that he made probably is partially to blame for that, I would say. I'm not saying it's wholly to blame. I'm just saying because that's probably the film that most people have seen. Whereas I think if people have seen just his Hong Kong efforts, maybe they wouldn't have that same takeaway. But again, I might be wrong. Anyway, I'm waffling a bit now. Those are my kind of like me trying to explain where, like, my perspective and where I was coming from, and kind of reiterating some of the issues and thoughts I have of Enter the Dragon. Again, it's still a film, despite all this, still a film I enjoy very, very much. Like I said, I kind of appreciate it now as kind of like a bonkers movie where there's lots going on, which you can say it's a very energetic movie. There is lots going on, and there's a lot crammed in there. And Bruce Lee's presence always shines through in this film. And that's why it is iconic, because loaded with kind of Western production values, with more money behind it, it really gives it that kind of gloss, I think. And it's a shame, because I think Lee would have used this film as a launching pad to launch his stardom in the West and go on to do probably more interesting things as a consequence. But of course, given his premature death at 32, we never got that. Yeah, so those are my thoughts. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed and participated in the poll. I intend to do a lot more of those once I've kind of looked at actors or directors or certain things in more focus, like I have with Lee, which I intend to do in the future. And like I say, if you like, or even if you have comments and issues with what I've just said, please put them in the comments below. Like I say, I welcome like constructive debate and feedback, as long as there's obviously no nasty comments, as it were. Yeah, and with that, I'll see you on the next one. Take care, and like I say, don't forget to subscribe, because there'll be a lot more coming soon. So yeah, take care, guys.